Welcome to the I Am Pausing podcast. I'm your host, Hannah, sitting down with leaders and experts at the forefront of performance and well-being. Join me for conversations about the science of rest, the cost of burnout, and the truth about real success. Settle in with a cup of tea and let's pause together. Stephen, welcome to I Am Pausing. I am so excited for this episode. It feels quite personal to me because I've known you for quite a long time and you've been a very important person, guide in my journey. So we met, I'd say, around 5 or so years ago when I came to one of your group breathwork sessions that you were running. I think it was in Hackney in London. It was so powerful for me, the way you held the space. And at that point, I wasn't super familiar with breathwork, and your gentle power, I would say, was what made me feel really safe in the space. And I had some really powerful things. So I became a little bit of a follower, going to all of your group breathwork sessions. And then at that point in my life, when it felt like things sort of crumbled, and the job, the relationship, everything, we also began to work one-on-one. And that was, after doing about 5 years of traditional talk therapy before I got to you, there were patterns that I was aware of, but just they were not shifting. And that is kind of what I found was the power of your work, was taking these things that I intellectually understood about myself, but actually shifting them through the body. So what I'd love to know to kick off is, because all this can sound a little bit airy, right? So how do you describe what you do if you were talking to someone at a dinner party, for example?
Sure. No, how do I describe what I do? So the main thing I work with people at the moment is on 3 levels. So we work on a narrative level, we work on an emotional level, and we work on a physiological level. Because it's interesting what you just said about, I understood it all, but I don't feel any different, or the pattern didn't shift, though I understood it, right? There's this illusion that when you understand, that therefore it will change. But from my experience, that only happens when also sort of like the emotional body and the physical body are in alignment with that. So what I try to do with people is to really find the sort of, if you almost imagine a Venn diagram, find that middle spot between your story, your narrative, your identity, your personality, whatever you want to call it, basically the headpiece, combined with the emotional component, combined with also a physiological understanding. And I feel like only when those 3 at the same time are moving forward, and are getting like the update of like, hey, we live in the present, not in the past. That's when I see the real shift, the integrated shift. So that's one piece. And then the second piece, and what I really try to do with people is to work on 3 levels, which is awareness, understanding, and intervention. And again, that's where I think often we get it wrong with good intentions. But we come in and we say, what breathwork exercise do I need to do to shift? Or I need to go to therapy. What type of therapy do I need? And it's good intentions, right? I'm not judging anyone here, but it's missing an awareness and an understanding piece that often we've never spent proper time on. So for example, when you take the body, like what is actually happening in your body? What does it feel like? How does it hold you? How does it shape you? And you see all these practices, like traditionally in like a lot of religious practices already use this, but even like today's somatic experiencing, focusing, like all these practices focus on what is actually happening in the body. And then from there's the piece that is around understanding. What does that actually mean? Okay, my shoulders are tight. Okay, I notice my jaw is going. I notice a frown on my face. I notice my stomach is upset. I notice I can't feel my feet, whatever it might be. What does that actually mean? And then we can start to talk about what intervention is needed. And by intervention, I mean like a breathwork session or taking a pause, right? Or whatever is needed. But if we skip that piece, then what are we doing? It feels like shooting an arrow into air and just hoping it lands somewhere. It doesn't really make sense to me. I hope this is a long dinner party, because this is what I would try to say to someone. We're basically finding the inflection point of those 3 areas, combined with also bringing awareness and understanding to it, so you get to understand what to do next, rather than me giving you a random exercise that I hopefully lands based on what I've seen. And I think from there, really what we're doing is we're we're bringing you as a person into the present. I feel like that's really the work. Because once you're fully in the present, once you're aware of what's happening right here, right now, there's very little we can't handle. It's 9 out of 10 times it's a response to something from the past, an idea of who we are, a body responding to something, inability to be with an emotion, and not being fully able to be with that at that moment in time.
I just want to kind of say that again.
Hmm.
Bringing you into the present. That just hits home for me because I remember those early sessions with you when I had so much language to describe my past because I'd gone and sat in a chair every week for 5 years and talked about my past. And so I remember coming to you and having a big emotion come up in a breathwork session. And then afterwards, you'd make me a herbal tea, we'd sit there I'd give you the spiel of this happened in childhood and this came up and da, da, da. And you'd be like, okay, so where do you feel it in your body? I'd be like, what? I don't know. And it's and it over time and it really, I think you just described it there right now, because it's like, oh, actually I can sort of feel it in my body and I don't need to live in this story of what happened in the past. And I think your background is so interesting because you do have a master's in clinical psychology, and so you came from that sort of traditional territory. So let's wind back, like give us a bit of history of what drew you to that path in the first place.
Yeah, I think in that sense, my upbringing was maybe a little bit different. My father was a trauma therapist. He started like, well, I mean, he's retired now, but doing EMDR and stuff like 20, 30 years ago when people still thought it was like witchcraft, you know? So I guess my point is like, I've never grown up in a family that like had a business or was like economy oriented in that sense. Like that was my world. And I guess that sort of influenced me. And I kind of tried to get out of that as a kid, I guess. But I think it did spark some interest in like, hey, how do humans actually work? So eventually, yeah, I did study clinical psychology, a bachelor's and a master's, but it didn't really resonate with me at that moment in time. I think partially because of the type of teaching, but also I ended up in this like, I did an internship in a place where all therapists were more stressed out than the people coming to them. And it was this horrible gray building. And it was like an insurance run, especially in Holland, insurance run dominated gray vibe, focused on illness. Like, what is your sickness and how we're going to talk about that to fix that with CBT. And like, and again, I guess everyone in there had good intentions, but my God, like it was not an environment that you're like, yes, here we're really trying to help people at all. So that's when I sort of went into the world of startups, which is complete opposite, right? It's like innovation. How can we help people in the best possible way? I mean, and this was like technology. So I was working in like an AI coaching startup, but a little bit ahead of its time to the point where we weren't able to really fully pull it off. It's hard to build your own AI, but it did get me to think like, oh yeah, wait, there's different ways of doing this. So I kind of went back into the world of working one-on-one, did a coaching education, like a year-long ICF training. And I landed exactly what you just described, where I was like, okay, I'm now working with you. And yes, we're seeing some changes. But to a certain extent, we're replacing one narrative with another narrative. Like it felt like taking a Lego head, you know, where you can take the head off and you put it, you exchange the head, but the body is still the same. And for me, that didn't really fully make sense because I'm like, yeah, but I can still see, like when I physically see or in the moment, there's still a tension. Now we're just saying, I'm okay, or I can do this, but there's nothing there, you know? So that's why I'm like, okay, I want to bring in body. And for me, the tool was breathwork. Like I started doing my own breathwork sessions, like, well, by now I'm getting old, 12 years ago, something like that. And for me, the breath had always done that job of bringing me inside. So it's like, okay, let's try a different entry point, a different route to insight, right? And that's where the sort of breathwork path came in. And I started to work with that, and I saw that people responded very differently. And I guess your experience is an example of that. Again, what I missed there was two things: touch, because most of the courses that we do are online. In therapy, touch is like absolute taboo unless you work 100% body worker, right? Like your physiotherapist can like touch, and that's totally fine. But a talking therapist is like the biggest taboo, and you'll get like, shunned from the industry straight away. Whereas touch, it's the first sense we develop as a human being. When a child is upset, what's the first thing we do? They don't come for a chat. They come for a hug. So I was like, okay, touch is vital. And we even have special receptors in the body that respond to attuned touch. Like we have our general touch to understand the world, and we have special receptors that are there for attuned, safe touch. And it's like, okay, that is a part of this. And in breathwork, we work with touch. So I wanted to learn more about that. So I went into the world of craniosacral therapy. And it really informed my practice and the way I work. But again, interestingly enough, though, yes, we work with touch, it's again all about embodied presence. Like if you're not in what we call self, right? If you're not landed, if you're not able to see all your own parts, but you're in them, you can't work with someone. It's impossible. So that again brought me back to, okay, be here now in your body. That's where I now landed then, where I'm like, okay, in breath work, we just breathe, but we don't bring in the talking component to make sense of the experience. Like we're talking beings, right? One of the first things as a baby, we start to talk, right? It's not like talking shouldn't be done. I don't see it like that. But it's a part of it. So I was like, okay, how can we bring the talking part together with the embodied experience and work in a way more targeted, so that when we do a breathwork session, it's not like there's a reason why, I don't know, in psychedelics, they always talk about setting an intention. It's an attempt to try a little bit, to work in a little bit more of a targeted way. But that's super tough. Sometimes it will just take you in a different direction. And the same in breathwork, right? You'll have a release, and we don't always have to make sense of it, but it can be helpful to then click, to be like, okay, this is this part of the narrative that we're
Wow.
now working with. So I'm not against talking, nor am I just body. Sometimes I get clients and they say, I have this huge problem and I don't want to talk about it. It's like, great, good luck then. We do sometimes need to talk about things for them to fully integrate, because the mind is a big part of it all. So that's kind of been the journey of, and I think, I mentioned now IFS is starting to play a big role, because people are starting to use the language themselves. They're breathing and a part comes up, right? They start to feel a tightness in the chest. They start to feel some sensations in the body, and they say, I notice my shoulders tightening up. It's like, oh, okay, what do you feel there? Well, it feels like a part of me. And they start to use the internal family thinkers language. Like they start to talk about parts. So to then integrate those two is fascinating. And that's kind of like the journey that I think I've been on, more through experimentation, if anything, to see like, okay, if I work with what's right in front of me, what seems to actually work, rather than the theoretical frameworks that I've been taught in that sense.
Yeah, I want to dive into that, because internal family systems, when I first heard that phrase, I was like, I don't really understand. But actually, you were the person that introduced me to IFS. It was in a one-on-one session when we were having a breathwork session, and then we talked afterwards. And what I found was there was a part of me who is very old, is very young, this part of me that wants everything to be perfect, wants everyone to be okay, and just can't rest until everything is done. And then there was this, this other part of me, which was newer for me to access, which I would call my sort of yoga teacher at that time. I think I was just about to go off and do my first yoga teacher training, and who found this calm, this present moment sense of rest and calm that was accessed. And and so then I went off and read, No Bad Parts, the sort of Richard Schwartz's book, I think you recommended to me. So for people who haven't been introduced to internal family systems before, how would you describe it?
Yeah, it's a good question. IFS fundamentally believes that we're not one thing. We are a collection of parts. And all of these parts have either a voice, or they might even be preverbal, and they have a movement or a need or a holding or a belief. But it doesn't believe we're one thing. And I think that's what you just said. Like I can be I don't know, 5-year-old perfectionist trying to make everyone happy, which is a wonderful wish for a 5-year-old. Like, how fantastic is that? That was a 5-year-old that was trying to make everyone happy and do things perfect. It's a beautiful thing, right? Not very functional as a grown up, though. right? But that's still true to that 5-year-old. And then you mentioned the yoga teacher, right? Which I would translate into the calm present moment. So that's also true. So what IFS does is that it basically believes that throughout life, we develop versions of ourselves, depending on the situation we went through. So that's why it's called systems. So depending on, I don't know, a big thing that happened in your life, maybe it's a parent's divorce or something like that, that would be one system. And to survive that moment in time, you had to develop certain parts to simply get through that moment. And those live on, and they still believe that we still live back in that time because they figured out how to survive that moment. And they're like, okay, we survived, keep doing this, right? So what is beautiful about IFS is, first of all, yes, it says no bad parts. So when you dive into a part, and this has turned out to be true over and over and over again, if you really dive into what is the job of this part, it has a good intention. The intention is always good. The effect might be detrimental, but they take it as far as being an addict. If you talk to the part that is addicted, it will always be to not feel the pain, to survive this moment, to not be depressed.
Trying to keep
Isn't
you safe.
that fantastic? Wow. There's a part of you that is trying to save you. Sure, the effect is not what we want. We all agree on that. But the intention is wonderful. So to really appreciate every part in the job that it's trying to do. And really what they do is they divide sort of the parts into 4 types of parts. So there's what they call the managers. So that's the day-to-day person, right? That's the one that sort of runs the show and that believes that if we do it this way, we'll be all right. So a bit of people pleasing there, a bit of working an extra hour there, a little bit, yes, no problem here. Like it will just make sure everything works. That's what they call the manager. And then they have what they call the protectors. So the protectors kick in when the manager's job is not doing its job. So I am getting negative feedback, panic, right? Or, you're supposed to get out of bed this morning, but you're not. Shit, shut down, right? So the protectors kick in when what we call trigger, right? Often when we talked about what is being triggered and you notice that strong response, that's a protector. It's kind of like the handbrake, or they call it a firefighter, or very often. And the point of that one is to be like, whatever it takes, we'll do it. Woof, sympathetic response, and just focus on the danger right here, right now in front of me. Now, both of those are an attempt to not get in touch with what they call the exile, which is the underlying deep pain, which often comes down to a young part that just wants to be loved, but feels not seen or heard or loved or understood or whatever it might be. And that's often where you get to the deep sadness, the deep shame, the deep pain, whatever it might be. And then they talk about a fourth, what is not really a part, which is the self, the grown up, here and now, that is calm. They have all these words for it, but it's more an experiential thing. It's like, I think that's what you arguably tap into when you're stepping into your own coaching, or when you're stepping into your yoga teacher, where you're calm, you're present, and you're just there. Boom, it lands. Here we are. I'm okay. Right here, right now. And from there, we get to see all these parts and work with them. Right now, very easy to explain. Oh, there's four types of parts, but people can have 30 parts at the same time. That doesn't make you schizophrenic, doesn't mean you hear voices. People are sometimes scared to me when I say, what does that part say? They're like, oh my God, are you going to lock me up? I'm like, oh, first of all, no. And second, no, it's very normal that we have these parts. So what's wonderful about it is that it leaves space for 2 or 3 or 50 things to be true at once. And often that is our experience. I deeply want to change. I want to break my pattern. And yet I'm being sucked into the same pattern over and over and over. How can both be true? Well, they can be true if they're 2 separate parts, rather than believing you're one thing. And that's in essence how we work in IFS.
I think that's really powerful, right? Rather than believing you are one thing. Because we can get so tied up in, this is my job, this is what I like, this is what I've always done. And it is really scary if you have this other part of you that's like, I actually want to go and do something completely different, right? Or whatever, right? Have a big change in my life. But firstly, allowing yourself to hear that part and then worrying about what everyone else thinks. I mean, I definitely had that. I was like, I've got a 15-year career, XYZ, all of this stuff. I can't just go and be a yoga teacher. I had such an ego stereotype of like what a yoga teacher was, and then a really strong attachment to my identity. And what I love about your work and what was really powerful with me was believing that both can be true. And actually now seeing that play out for myself, right? We've done it together. We've stood in rooms with groups of founders and CEOs and, that sort of whole, like, that world, which was my whole world, which I then felt like I stepped away from, went to India, went to Portugal, was in all of these different trainings and spiritual practices. And there was these two, then I guess, parts, identities. And I was really scared. I remember the first LinkedIn post that I did after being completely off LinkedIn for a couple of years, being like, hey, this is me now. This is what I do. Who wants to come and breathe with Stephen and I for a day? But it worked. And I remember actually now kind of switching gears to those events. We did a lot of work together on the nervous system, holding space for professionals to come to learn about the nervous system. So talk to me a little bit about the nervous system and why it's important and how it plays a role with all of this.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a huge part, and it's arguably the biggest part. But it's important to talk about it in a very nuanced way, because it's one of those things that has blown up, right? Where in the part it was, I don't know, in the past it was maybe all about, like, I don't know, self-belief, very mind, right? Very neural network, what's happening in the brain, where it's like, well, just because we know where it is in the brain doesn't mean we know how it works, nor how to influence it, nor how most medication doesn't really do its job. Same with the nervous system. You're seeing the same thing happen. So even now in our language, we're talking about the nervous system. Well, that's incorrect. It's the autonomic nervous system we're talking about specifically. And it sounds like a small thing, but like, your touch receptors, or your capacity to move your muscles are also the nervous system, but we don't work with those necessarily immediately. So I think when we talk about the nervous system, it's important that to be specific. And what we're talking about is the autonomic nervous system, which is one of six, right? It's almost like, it looks like a decision tree, where it takes shape. So the autonomic nervous system in its essence is the nervous system that is tasked with making sure that you are okay, making sure that you are safe, internally and in the world at that moment in time. So what it fundamentally regulates, the autonomic nervous system, is your energy levels. And energy is either expended on making sure you are safe in the here and now. And that is done by what is called the sympathetic nervous system. Now that's where stress runs through. So whenever people hear stress, they go, oh, stress is bad. Stress is fantastic. Stress is what happens in the morning and gets you up. A human being without stress would just be lying flat all day long. Stress is not your problem. Too much stress is, we can talk about that later. But that's what is basically called your sympathetic part of your autonomic nervous system, which is all about regulating up. Now, as long as that upregulation and mobilization is combined with a sense of safety, then that's you and me right now, right? We're talking, we're in interaction, we're going to work, we're going to the gym, we're having a nice chat, we're moving, all fine and well. That can also tip over, right? And that's where often the term is used, window of tolerance, which is a very useful framework. And I'd highly recommend people to look it up to understand how the nervous system operates. But basically, when for whatever reason our autonomic nervous system and through all the other senses has picked up some form of a threat, some form of danger, boof, it kicks in. Right. That's when we start to talk about anxiety. Anxiety is basically high energy in the autonomic nervous system combined with a sense of threat. So we become anxious, or we start to defend ourselves, right? The fight-flight response, often called. So that's the autonomic side. Energy is used to keep you safe at this moment in time. Now, when energy is not predominantly used, because the other side can be active at the same time, predominantly used to keep you safe at that moment in time, it starts to work on your internal world. So that's where recovery takes place. So the opposite of the sympathetic side is called the parasympathetic nervous system. So this one is all about what is called rest and digest, recovery. So, okay, energy is not needed to keep me safe right now, so I can start to recharge my battery. So that's the parasympathetic side. So that is, I don't know, sitting at home, watching a bit of Netflix, not thinking about work ideally, not being on a screen ideally. Or even right here, right now, when we have a gentle, calm conversation, we feel safe, we can chat, it's okay. So that comes with the exhale. That's the parasympathetic side. Now you can also be overactivated on the parasympathetic side, which is basically shut down. So not enough energy plus danger. That's when you get depression, right? That's when you get lethargic feelings. That when you get what people say, animals play dead, right? When they can't move anymore, when you can't get out of bed. Apparently reality is just too intense that the body says the safest way to deal with this is to fully shut down because I can't fight my way out of it. I can't talk my way out of it. And I can't just quit my job. So I'm just going to shut you down. It's my last option, right? Again, good intentions to keep you safe, not very helpful in a day-to-day life. So those are really, when we talk about the nervous system, that's really what we're talking about. The autonomic nervous system, the gas pedal and the brake pedal. And they can be running at the same time and they constantly shift states. And it also runs everything else in your body, like, your heart rate, your breathing, your temperature, et cetera, et cetera. It's all run by that system. Now, what's important to understand here is that it will override whatever you thought of whenever it senses danger. So you thinking, I should leave my job, that's a wonderful thought until reality kicks in. Nervous system kicks in. That's not a safe thing to do. There we go. And suddenly the danger is quitting the job. The narratives will start spinning that way. The apocalypse will happen if I quit my job. I won't find another job. You'll never get an income. You'll probably die in a box somewhere next to the road, right? That's where it goes. Very effective to make you stay and keep you safe. Very effective, right? So what's super important to understand, and this is where we start to really bridge in the science piece, is that none of this is woo-woo. When people hear breath work or they think, I need to rock up with a hat, a feather and smoke, it's like, no, like this is just data. You run your entire company on data, yet your main data source you're not using, right? So this goes back to the awareness and understanding. What is actually happening in my body that is overwriting the quality of my thoughts?
So what can we do? Like just going to that example of the person, because I hear this all the time. Wow, how did you do that? How did you just quit your job and change everything? It's so brave. I want to do that. I've been thinking about doing that for years, but I'd imagine what's happening within their system is what you just described. So if I'm a person and I'm there now, what can I do? What are maybe some small kind of practices, or what would you advise?
Yeah. Well, this is where sort of the model would apply, right? The practices should be focused on awareness. What makes leaving your job so threatening? And is that a reflection of the here and now, or is that a reflection of your story? So what are you responding to when you think about, I want to quit my job? What makes your job so challenging at this moment in time? Because often what I see, it's not the job, it's the way we treat and the way we show up in the job. If your job would truly be 9 to 5, would you still want to quit? If you know how to set boundaries, would you still want to quit? If you could shut down after a workday, would you still want to quit? Or would it then be a fantastic tool that allows you to live the life you want? So this is where the awareness piece comes in. When I am at work, how do I hold myself? This you could check. You can set a timer and every, hour, what do I notice in my body right now? Am I stressed or am I fully relaxed? Okay.
Mm.
Are you stressed? Well, how does that show up then? I notice a frown and I notice I'm typing and I haven't taken a break and I just keep going. And I can imagine you don't like your job then. No one would. Even a yoga teacher that would show up like that wouldn't like their work. Doesn't matter then, right? So start to bring awareness. Okay, what is it? What does that actually mean? I feel like I'm constant micromanaged by my, okay, well, that's relational. That has nothing to do with your job. That's you in relation. What makes it so scary? To talk to your manager and say, hey, I don't appreciate this and this. Can we do it this and this way? No, I can't do that. Then I'll get fired. Is that true? Is that actually true? Or is it just terrifying to speak up to your manager? Yeah, it's terrifying. Oh, where does that come from? Well, woof. So it's not necessarily about quit your job. Rarely interested in what you do, what you decide to do next. But can you fully become aware of how you show up? And there's tons of practices. This is where journaling comes in. This is where somatic experiencing comes in. This is where regulation comes in. So when we talk about nervous system regulation, which is really often downshifting from an overactivation into bringing you back into a bit of tolerance, right? When you go into a meeting like this, touch the face. Let yourself know, I'm safe, I am okay, right? Because you're directly feeding into that parasympathetic nervous system that will connect you to safety, will connect you to presence, and now you can have a conversation, right? This is where the breath might come in. I feel like I'm underactivated, I can't activate myself. Okay, take a couple of activating breaths to bring yourself into the here and now, give yourself access to a little bit of power so you can stand your ground, so you can set that boundary.
Mm.
So but it begins with awareness and understanding and not just blatantly blaming it on the job. This is how you go up in it. Like there's
It's
people going
true.
through
I
way
think,
worse things.
yeah, it's true. I remember, when you're in such a, and you talked about the window of tolerance, right? Our capacity to hold how much we have that, and that can shrink over time, right? If we just keep going, and that can be where burnout happens. And I remember when I was burnt out, I didn't think I was burnt out, because to me, burnout's like I'm collapsed in bed, I can't get up. But I wasn't. I was up and going, but there was a twitch in my eye that just didn't go away. There was like a knot in my whole shoulder that no matter how many osteopaths I saw, it just wouldn't go away. And so, like, at that point, I wasn't able to sit and say, or even kind of like understand, have this awareness of, because I was just too exhausted. Right. And so that's why I love what you say about, setting a timer and just every hour throughout the day, checking in maybe as a starting point, or even 3 or 4 times a day. How am I sitting? How am I breathing? And that's, the breath was actually really, I'd say, powerful for me at that point, because when I learned how to breathe properly, things started to shift. And then when things started to shift, I could see more clearly my situation and make decisions from a more clear place. So coming back to the breath, because I know, it is, in my opinion, the breath is one of our most powerful tools of shifting our physiological state in just a few moments or seconds. Give us your thoughts on that. Like, how do we breathe properly, in your opinion?
Yes. Now the breath is huge, and like still to this day find it fascinating. I mean, it's slowly changing, but like we'll spend all that time on like diet and all these sleep things, but like stop breathing for 3 minutes and that's it. Like it's that one tool that is always there ongoingly, right? And it's your friend, or I wouldn't say it's enemy because it's keeping you alive, it's doing the job well. No, so the breath is directly linked to your autonomic nervous system state. And just to explain this, like intuitively, this makes sense, right? Because we talked about energy up, sympathetic. Now, when energy goes up, what do you need? You need more energy. So what are you going to do? You're going to inhale more. So whenever we are in a stressed, high energy state, we'll focus on the inhale, right? So any breathwork practice that has an emphasis on the inhale, the Wim Hof type things like, right? That will have a upregulating effect. It will activate you. Right? Now, any breathwork practice that has either breaks or has an emphasis on the exhale, right, will be a parasympathetic activation, dominance. So it will slow you down. It will shift you into recovery. And again, we intuitively already do this. We had a long day at work and we come home, and what do? It's naturally there. So we know this. We just need to bring it into sort of the conscious level and proactively use this fantastic tool that we've been given. So when people do breathwork practices, what is super important is to first become aware, am I in a downregulated state and do I need to upregulate? Or am I too activated and do I need to downregulate? And then we can decide on what is the right way to breathe. When we talk about these things, there's basically 4 basic guidelines that we always talk about, which is ideally breathing through the nose when possible, right? Sometimes people have like deviated septums or they have ongoing allergies. But in an ideal world, we'd be breathing in and out through the nose 95% of the time, unless you're doing a very intense workout. In and out through the nose. The nose has over the unique functions when it comes to breathing. Your mouth is just a big hole in the face. Like that's all it is. And that's very effective for a lot of energy at a moment in time when you're actually in danger and you need it. 99% of the times you don't need that. It's an email. You're fine, right? It just doesn't feel like that. So breathing through the nose, breathing deeply. Now, what we mean by that is not necessarily breathing big, right? But what we mean by breathing big is properly allowing your diaphragm to push down, to flatten out, right? Often this is called belly breathing. I'm not a biggest fan of that term because belly breathing, I've seen people who are now pushing out their belly in and out. Well, you can do that without breathing. So it has nothing to do with your breath. The abdominal muscles need to be relaxed. The reason your belly is coming out is because your diaphragm is pushing down on your abdominal space, on your intestines, on everything that's there. That's why it's coming forward. That's why the belly is coming out. But then the rib cage is often not used when we talk about belly breathing, where your rib cage can expand, it can move, it's super dynamic, right? When we're in a locked rib cage, our breath automatically will be more shallow. It will just be happening in the depth. So a deep breath means an activation of the whole system. So the easiest way to explain is almost like following the bottom of your rib cage and almost imagining like a hula hoop sitting around it that is expanding and contracting. So that's a deep breath. Then we want to breathe slow. Most people overbreathe, which makes sense because when we're stressed, when we have a lot of sympathetic activation, we need a lot of energy, so we breathe faster. Most people breathe around 20, 25,000 times a day. Ideally, that would be around 8,000 divided by
Oh.
3, right? That's a huge gap. Again, no one's doing anything wrong here. It's just a body that thinks it needs this, right? So we want to slow the breath down. So ideally, we would breathe in for 4 or 5 seconds, breathe out for 4 or 5 seconds. Perfect world, right? We don't live in a perfect world, but perfect world situation. And there's a lot of research backing this up, that that's actually when we breathe in for around 5 seconds and breathe out for around 5 seconds, that's when the body goes, yes, this is what I enjoy. And then ideally even taking breaks. So you exhale, you simply wait. You don't hold the breath, but you wait until the body says, now I want to breathe again, so that we don't end up in that habitual over breathing. And this is where it gets interesting. Yes, the autonomic nervous system dictates how we breathe, but if we change the way we breathe, we change the state of our autonomic nervous system right then and there. So through the breath, we can signal you're safe, you are okay. And then the body will start to adopt that state. And you literally said, I can see perspective again, right? Because the prefrontal cortex comes back online. Our thinking capacity comes back online. Our emotional state is dampened. It's nuanced, it's put in perspective, and we can make an actual decision in that moment in time. So yeah, so any breathwork exercise that you come across, but people are like, oh, should I count 4 or 5 seconds or 7 or 8 seconds? Or it doesn't really matter. Focus on, is it emphasizing the inhale or the exhale? Do I need to activate myself or calm myself? And then decide from there, okay, I need to either have more breaks and more exhale, or if I want to activate myself, I need to emphasize the inhale a little bit more and start there. Like keep it simple, because otherwise you just get lost in the sort of woods of exercises and you don't know what to do and you end up doing nothing. This effect takes place within like 30 seconds, right? This is not something you have to do for 20 minutes and you have to like hide somewhere in the bushes to do this. Like you can do this at a desk. You can relax your shoulders, relax your jaws, relax your abdominal muscles, and take 3 conscious breaths, and you will notice a small shift.
And I'm curious about you personally,
Yeah.
because sometimes I think that people assume that people that do this, teach this work, are somehow immune to like the pressures that other people face. What does your own sort of daily and weekly practice look like? How do you use these tools yourself?
Yeah, no, and they're needed, right? I think the reason I got into this work was because of a total numbness to all of this. Like that's why I'm intrigued in it, because of my complete incapacity to work with it. And that's how I spent the first 25 years of my life. So no, I'm not perfect at this at all. And then again, I'm also human living in a world that has these stresses. There's no way around it. For me and this is where the education has really helped, right? To make sure it's not random what I'm doing. There's a base for it. Like I think I'm understanding why I'm doing the things I'm doing, right? I am a big believer of micro. Like I think we need to work micro and macro. And what I mean by that is like ongoing small check-ins, not once a year at a big retreat, but ongoing day-to-day 3 to 4 times, right? And then the macro, like the retreat, is very helpful to get that baseline down. Very helpful, but it's not the only thing, nor is the micro the only thing, right? So we always talk about dusting and deep clean. You need to do both sometimes, ideally, right? Sometimes you need to do the deep clean and ongoingly dust the house a bit so it doesn't look like a toast all the time, right? So my small practices, I'm a big fan of touch, and I think it's underrated as a self tool. So the way we are wired, like when we're in that sympathetic state, the face goes and the neck tenses up, right? And the jaws often go. So to literally like use your hands to really like gently calm that down around the ears, around the neck is where we stimulate the vagus nerve. That's very popular at the moment. But even to get the face out of the frowns, right? Because when we're serious, it gets stuck, right?
It's really nice.
Yeah, it's really nice, right? And immediately you notice that, right? It just kicks in around the arms, right? Just holding yourself like this. So those little practices I do all the time. Shaking is very effective. Shaking I see done rarely right. So most of the time when people talk about shaking, I see like a video on like Instagram of someone like wildly jumping around. But jumping around is an activating thing and your muscles are tense. Shaking done properly should be literally like a dog in the park. So everything needs to be super soft, right? So the abdominal states need to be the abdominal muscles need to be soft. The pelvic floor needs to be soft so that there's literally a vibration happening, which when you're jumping, those muscles are tense. So don't jump, like very micro vibrate. Like that is what is needed when you use shaking. The breath. Check it out. I'm not breathing. Oh, right. Here we go again. I'm off. Okay. One gentle deep breath into the nose. Find space. Make space for all of your parts, literally, and let them settle. So that's where I use the micro a lot. And then you spend on the awareness and understanding, the less intervention you need because it becomes a second nature. It becomes habitual. So we can go into the positive spiral in that sense. So when we're spiraling in a negative way, in a difficult way, these habits just make us tighter, tighter, tighter. But when you consistently come back to them and open it up, that is also what becoming the new standard because the body is experiencing, hey, I'm still alive, I'm still safe, I'm still okay. I don't need to operate like this. Bodies don't want to operate like that. They feel like they have to, right? It feels like they don't have a choice. So once we start to expose ourselves to different ways of showing up and constantly bring those traits in, that's when you start to see that the body starts to adopt it as the new normal and you don't have to constantly regulate or change your state.
Yeah, so powerful. These well, I mean, in my language, I'd call them like mini pauses. We need multiple mini pauses throughout the day. Then we need our, weekly pauses where we go a bit deeper, and then we need our immersive pauses, going on a retreat, etc. I think you touched on something really interesting. Like you mentioned a little bit of your journey was feeling numb, like a numbness, and that's sort of driven you through all of this work. And can you tell us a little bit more, tell me a bit more about what that was like?
I know they loved me and yeah, they're humans and they're not perfect. Okay. So now it's over to me. And as long as I keep pointing, nothing is going to change. And at the same time, the body was giving the signals. I was just wasn't picking them up, wasn't internalizing them, right? So my background was in professional sports. So bodies are machines there. They're treated like a machine and you keep running them until they literally injure, until they break down. And then what you do is you try to recover as fast as possible, knowing what's the best way for the body, but as fast as possible until it works again. You would take painkillers every week just to be able to do your own sport, right? So the body as a machine and the body as something that sometimes gets in your way when it breaks down, not as a feeling being that is constantly giving you information. So somewhere along the journey, I picked up of like, okay, if I am smart, then I get through the world. I was very small as a child, so fight was never an option for me. So I had to find a way around it, right? So my two options were either collapse, disappear, become very small, literally, and also in energy, or my manager to become the chameleon, which now we call people pleaser. I'll be whoever you need me to be, and I'll be friendly, and I'll be na, all in an attempt to not have to feel for whatever pain was there. But eventually it just started to break down, right? And this is what every person with like yourself, right, will say, like eventually the body will catch up and it will start to scream louder and louder and louder until you start to listen. And the sooner you listen, the less damage. Like that is not rocket science, but you just need to become aware of that being a thing. So yeah, so the numbness, like I would be very low in emotional bandwidth. So some things that should give me deep joy didn't really give me deep joy, but I was also rarely super angry, nor did I really cry, because fundamentally in the nervous system, it works as activation. So I often ask people who say, I never get angry. Well, how often do you truly laugh? We rarely have access to that because it comes with the same energy. But if you shut the door on one side of the emotion with that energy level, right, that emotional charge on the nervous system, you're also shutting the door to most of the other ones that come with that. Right? So if you never get angry, it will be hard to fully cry. It will be hard to fully laugh, to fully enjoy things, right? And that was me. That's how I went through life. So I would win national championships. I was like, cool, whatever.
But why was that a problem for you? Because I feel like I know people who would say, yeah, I'm very stable. I don't get too upset. Things don't, because I'm the opposite, right? My problem has always been like I've had big emotions. So mine has been bringing it down and regulating it in. But other people would say, wow, yeah, you have a lot going on there.
Yeah.
I'm stable, I'm steady. Like, what was the problem for you in that?
Well, there's a huge difference between being stable and having an incapacity to feel. So yes, I would like to think right now that I'm stable in that sense. But my work was to learn how to feel. The problem was that eventually what I realized is that I've probably been in some sort of minor depression for the first 25 years of my life. And I wasn't enjoying it, right? And my problem was that, just like you were saying, my whole body was shutting down. Chest was going, trembling. Like I literally so there were problems. Of course, there were problems. Relationally, it was very difficult with me because my two options were either to people please you, which would end up in resentment, right? Because I'm crossing my own boundary, or to disconnect and never let you get to me. So there's a deep loneliness there, right? If I never let you get through me, or I can never show you what I'm truly feeling because I don't even know, I'm super lonely. Relationally, that's not really working either, is it? Relationally, that's not working. Physically and physiologically, my body is starting to shut down. So I was 27, 28, and things just stopped working. It literally stopped working, right? So that's the problem. And you can do this for ages, especially when you're young and you still have so much resilience, so much energy, but at a certain point, it will just stop. Now that's different from being stable. People often confuse the two. But for me, someone who is stable, and I think that's what you're alluding to as well, is someone who's able to deeply go into emotion and be in their experience without it completely overwhelming them unless that's necessary. Like when there's a bus coming towards you, I want you to be overwhelmed by stress and jump out of the way. I want you to, right? I want you to almost be overwhelmed by that and the beauty of that moment, right? That's what's the point of being alive otherwise, right? To be deeply in that experience, right? But to most of the times when you're not in those extremer moments, to be able to be with your experience without it being in charge of you, right? And this is what you see. Like I often talk about what true safety to me is to fully be able to ride the full spectrum of your experience and still realize that you're okay. And what I see with most stable people is that they approach it the Navy SEAL way. So they become super strong. They know how to charge through. They got all their guns blazing. And yes, they're technically the dangerous person in the room and they're the safest person in the room, but it's completely numb. It's completely numb. Right? And then they come home and they can't connect to their own child. Is that the life then? Is that stability? So there's for me a bit difference there in what stable means in that sense.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because I know a lot of the people that you and I work with, right, in the environments that they find themselves in
Yeah.
their work, for example, it is not the culture, right, to express ourselves fully, right? Our emotions. And in an ideal world, we're all feeling all of our emotions and expressing them and not being like Navy SEAL about it. But a lot of us are running companies, you know, where we have to communicate news in a certain way and, you know, and yeah, how do you see balancing these two things?
Yes. No, and this is a big problem, right? Because it's easy for me to sit here and talk about these things when you're not in that reality, right? And I really want to show compassion for the people in those situations because it is a systemic problem. It's not an individual problem. And I think what the industry or the world for that matter loves to do at this moment in time is blame the individual for something that is clearly systemic. It's clearly systemic, right? Human beings are fundamentally made for connection, period. Like talk to any renowned psychiatrist, psychologist, and the research points at it again and again and again. We are relational beings. And for us to have a relationship, we need to be safe to each other. Now, that is the complete opposite of 95% of corporates that I've worked with and that I've seen. You are my enemy. You are, yeah, maybe we have a good working relationship, but my God, I would never show you what I actually think because it's unsafe, right? So it is an institutional problem. We are raised, especially in the Western world, as you are the individual. It's all about you. No, it isn't. But then again, you're told you are and you're trying to survive. So that's what you'll do. But it's not healthy for an individual to have to deal with all of this. It should be the group carrying this. That's what a company should be. And it's so ironic, right? The word corporate, corpus, body, right? It's literally called an embodied being, but it's operating like a sick body in that sense, right? Where all organs are fighting against each other and everyone's trying to get on top of each other. So like, I do really want to emphasize like, these are systemic problems. And this is why I think 95% of people doing this type of work that you and I do, and you're doing the same, right? You end up wanting to talk to leadership because that's the head. We call it the head, right? The head of the body, right? So at some point, I think, well, there's two options, right? Either you are okay in that world and you are okay with it. Fine. Then do it that way if you're okay with it. Other option is that a body will start to wind down to the point of destruction. And that happens either in your body or in your private life. I haven't spoken to my friends in a while. Like, when is the last time you had a good call with your best friend? For 7 months ago. Okay, there's your first sign. So it will happen relationally outside of the body, or the body will literally shut down and you'll get sick in some way, shape, or form. So at some point you need to make a decision like, hey, this would be my philosophy. Like, what's the point of my life? Now, I'm not religious as such. So for me, it would be to have my experience of it, period. Like, that's all I have is my experience of life. Like, that's the one thing, like, you can take my body, but don't take my experience of it, right? Like, you wouldn't trade it the other way around. So yes, it's systematic, but it doesn't mean you have to be in that system, right? Or you can find a way, and this is possible. And I've seen people do this over and over again. And sometimes you see it in leadership, you see it happening, right? You see that once people get to, I don't know, partner level, they've done it. And suddenly they go skiing with the family. And suddenly, because for whatever reason, now they're so safe in their position that they can start to be friendly and they can start to take time and leave the office a little bit earlier. Right? So it is possible, but start with, how am I showing up? Is this how I want to show up? And then under the is this how I want to show up box, if the answer is no, what can I do? And if that then takes a hit on the way you operate in work, or you might have to leave, well, then so be it. But then it's an informed decision.
Mm.
But yeah, I agree with you. Like, and not even just in companies, like society as a whole, in like Western societies, like I wouldn't be able to speak about others, but that's messed up.
Yeah.
It's just not in line with what we are.
No, bringing the humanness back. I mean, I must say, um, I do work with some really inspirational founders and leaders who, it starts with them. So they first have to bring this awareness into themselves, and then they are bringing it into their teams, starting a tough conversation or a meeting with just a few breaths or a minute of presence, and bringing this humanness in, right? Creating space for asking, how are you doing really? Rather than just like, hey, you're right. Yeah, I'm all right. So yeah, it is possible. Unfortunately, it's not the norm. I think we've covered so many different topics today, and I feel like we could just keep talking. There is so much here. Someone is interested to know more. What is, how do you work? What does your work comprise of at the moment?
Yeah. Well, I work one-to-one with a lot of people. So that's the main thing I do. This can be online. This can be, well, I live in Lisbon. So if you're around, you can come. Yeah, or online sessions. So that's the main way I work. And what is a little bit different is we always take 90, always do 50 or an hour, but I really like to take the time and to also bring in the embodiment piece. So that's the main way I work with people. And then, yeah, occasionally I run sessions, group events, or I get involved in retreats. So there's many ways to work either one-to-one or in a group capacity. And yeah, I mean, people can always follow the socials and these kinds of things. So I'm not very active on them. If people want to get in touch, that's always, most of the times we just start with a bit of an intake. We just start with getting a bit of a picture, like, am I the person to actually help you? And then from there, people often ask me like, oh, how long does it take? Or is it like your traditional therapy every week? It's like, no, it isn't. We normally start with 4 or 5 sessions and just get a picture of like, what are we dealing with here? What do we want to work on? And is this working for you? Right? Really working with like what is working for you and see if we can go from there. And then sometimes people come for 3 sessions and they say, oh yeah, that did the job. And for other people, I work with years, and for some reason that brings them something. which is also fine. So in that sense, I don't have a fixed number of sessions or packages or these kinds of things. I just work with what is alive and let's crack on with that.
And that's what I love about your work and how you approach things. You have so many different skills, right? Weaving in the clinical psychology, but also now the parts, internal family systems, the breath, the autonomic nervous system, craniosacral therapy, touch awareness. And I really felt that when I worked with you one on one, the ability to breathe and be held and feel safe, but then also be challenged you know, and asked really good questions. So yeah, I highly recommend anyone to work with you. Uh, because yeah, I think that you do really important work in this world. I think a lot at the moment about our modern day lives, about the attention economy, our phones, screens. We haven't even got into all of these topics, but what you're doing is bringing us back to the body, back to ourselves, and it is so needed. So genuinely, thank you for the work that you do. We have a closing question for this podcast that I like to ask everyone, which is, if you had one message about well-being that you could put on a billboard that everyone in every workplace could see, what would it read?
The first thought that came up was, how are you doing?
I love that. How are you doing?
Yes, I think that's yeah, to have a genuine micro check-in, like how are you actually doing right now? Yeah, and maybe start there.
That's so powerful because it's also like, how am I doing? How are you doing? Check in with yourself, check in with each other.
Let's start there.
Amazing. Let's get that billboard created.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Stephen. It's been so much fun. Talk to you soon.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all the work you're doing as well. It's really important.